If you're looking for a new way to support Side Mission, check out Dubby.gg, an energy supplement company trying to make a difference. Make sure to use code SIDEMISSION for 15% off your order. Thank you, Dubby, for sponsoring this episode, and we hope you enjoy.
Welcome into the newest episode of Side Mission. I, like always, am your host, Rick Dale, joined by the boys, Kyle Lynch and Matt Beck. And today we're talking about episode 6 of Twisted Metal on Peacock. If you are still listening to these episodes, even though we are months and months past the release date of this show, I salute you, because I know that we probably should have just recorded our entire review of the season in one episode. We made our choice. We're sticking with it, though. We're doubling down. Episode 6, fellas. And not going to lie, as much as I liked the last 3 episodes, episode 6 is kind of a momentum killer. It feels very much like an unnecessary filler episode that exists for really 2 reasons, and I feel like both of those reasons could have been better executed and incorporated into the main plot. One in particular I feel was completely wasted and could have been used a lot last episode. So let's go ahead and just dive in. Kyle, we said that we were really excited to see where the episode or where the show goes, especially considering the ending of episode 5 ends on a pretty big cliffhanger. You know, John Doe has just rescued Quiet from Agent Stone, and you know, we didn't really know what was going to end up happening, if she was going to be okay. I mean, you guys knew because you watched the whole show. I didn't, so it really was just me that I'm talking about here. And I'm not going to lie, this episode kind of just makes it seem like what happened at the end of that episode was not a big deal. Am I wrong for feeling that way? Because that's kind of how I felt when this episode started.
Yeah, I think that this episode was definitely a weird one, how they waited so long to give us, you know, more backstory, more filler information that I feel like probably would have worked better in the last episode because it fit the setting a little bit more, you know. This one, especially in the beginning, how like the whole reason they're forced into like this diner area is because of, you know, this storm that was just a cameo from a power up, you know, that was in the games. But I didn't really think this whole thing was necessary. I thought that they could have had this entire episode's plot fulfilled within 15 minutes of another episode that already had something else going on.
Yeah, it does. So I'll go ahead and just skip straight to the point that I was trying to make, just because I feel like there's no reason to dance around it. It feels like this episode only really exists for the 2 reasons of telling Quiet's backstory, which is very, very interesting, and you end up feeling a lot of sympathy for her because of her backstory. And the other reason is to, I guess in the writer's words, or not in their words, but I guess in their mind, to finally see John Doe and Quiet hook up. That's kind of the only 2 reasons this episode exists. Because the whole storm element, I personally felt like that was just kind of a MacGuffin or a coincidence that existed to make the episode like have any kind of meaning. And as Kyle, as we talked about before we hopped on here to record, it's not really a thing that comes back at all the rest of the season. And that really, for me, it kills any legitimate reason for the whole, what was it, the Watkins storm or whatever? Is that what it's called? Like, to me, there's no reason for it to exist outside of, oh, we have to have these characters trapped here so that they end up fucking, and so we can tell her backstory. And to me, I feel like that's kind of cheap. Now, I do want to go over the positives, Matt, because as I mentioned before, Quiet's backstory is really tragic, is really interesting. That she ends up signing her and her brother up for essentially this 4-year term to fulfill some kind of weird servitude role to this community, and it ends up being really, really terrible. Like, they're basically slaves that if they make any mistake in their day-to-day, whether it's doing chores, talking when they're not, given permission to. They are severely punished and like brutally mutilated for that. And I think that that backstory is really interesting, Matt. And I'm sure that you feel the same, or you felt the same when you watched it.
Honestly, I did. I kind of felt like it was a little surreal to see her backstory play out the way it did, and not just hers, but also Lau's as well, her brother. Um, the mutilation where he dude cuts off their ears and he is basically wearing it as a necklace was a little kind of a shock for me because this setting is just like what you expect from any everyday restaurant, and then you just have like these super like proper uptight rich people, and then they're just surrounded by these employees who have like something missing, like what Quiet's missing her finger here.
Yes.
um so it was. I honestly don't know how I felt about it. Like the transitioning from what was currently going on and that restaurant with John Doe and Quiet, and then straight back to her backstory is really interesting, especially when what was it? There was an active shooter situation happening, and then like at one point that's going on, and at another point we see their boss or whoever confronting them, and this other woman, she gets basically shot in the face, and then these guys in what was like a pink limo or something like that, or hers, just appear
The
and
Reapers,
lift
yeah.
the Reapers exactly lift up her body, and I was just kind of like, I really feel like that this episode is definitely it's not to push the story forward. And honestly, Rusty, when you said fucking, that took me by surprise. I didn't actually straight up think that you would say that. So I was like, I'm glad I wasn't drinking something at the time because I would have spit it out all
Well,
over my monitor.
well, I mean, and that's just kind of the thing is like I think all three of us can agree, like they've absolutely been shipping John Doe and Quiet the
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
time. That is absolutely a story arc that these writers wanted to explore. And again, it's not like the romance doesn't make sense. It does make sense. It makes a ton of sense. And I think that my issue with it is like the first time they have sex, it's like, okay, finally, like
yeah.
they did it. They finally did it. The second time, I'm like, all right, now we're just using this whole sex in a ball pit thing as like a shock factor, and I can't believe that's a sentence in 2023. But it just the second time it feels like, oh, in case you missed it the first time, let's do it again, and it just didn't have quite the same effect. It didn't work. Now,
Yeah,
I,
exactly.
again, there were things that I felt worked. Again, like her backstory. Again, just the idea of, and the other part of it is, when she initially brings the idea to her brother in the beginning, it's, you do your 4 years of time, and then you're rewarded with this free like beachfront property, to do with whatever you please. And then obviously that woman that comes along, as you mentioned, Matt, ends up spilling the beans of, oh, it's all a lie. I've did my 4 years and I've gotten nothing out of it. And it's one of those things where, like, you kind of think when you hear Quiet mention the idea in the beginning, you're like, something about that seems very fishy. Like it doesn't seem like that's how this is going to go the way you think it's going to go. It seems like this is a very, very bad thing, and you're essentially willfully putting yourself into slavery that you are going to have a very hard time getting out of. And I think that what I liked about this backstory, I think that it did its job and that it is very hard to watch. Like especially when they're kind of like when you see from Quiet's perspective as she's walking up to the counter for the person that she's a servant for, and then walking back to the table with the food, you kind of see like from her perspective these people that are wearing sandals that part of the strap around the toes is someone's middle finger, or you mentioned the manager of the fast food restaurant having a necklace with a bunch of ears on it. Like it's really, really hard to watch, and I think that that was the point. I don't think that that scene was intended to sterilize that. We talk about sterilization with like the MCU and how the comics are severely sterilized for children. This show is not going that route, and I appreciate that. I appreciate them taking something that is very difficult to watch, that is very tough subject matter, and not sterilizing it. I appreciate that. Now, the other thing that I really liked, and again, I hate that it's done in this episode because I feel like this didn't need to be an episode on its own. But the idea that Quiet has always blamed herself for her brother's death because she got them into this in the beginning, and he ends up in episode 1 making the choice to kill himself to keep her alive. She has blamed herself this whole time. It's why she has been so reluctant to commit to staying with John Doe this whole time. She feels that she needs to go carry out her mission and she doesn't need to drag someone else down with her. I feel like, Kyle, that leads to a lot of really good emotional character moments. Again, hate that it's in this episode, but it goes to show there are bright spots in this episode like that.
Yeah, the one thing that I can praise about the show as a whole is the way that the chemistry just works between John Doe and Quiet. I mean, I remember when we started this show, I had no idea how I was going to feel as Anthony Mackie as the lead, and I have a real I said at the beginning, as you watch the show, you really grow into him being the lead, and you feel very comfortable with him in this role. I think that the chemistry is the same way between them. It's like you said earlier, when they fucked, it was like, okay, finally it happened. But I think last episode, when, Quiet was seeing her brother, I think that would have been the perfect time to revisit her backstory to kind of see everything. And then at the end of the episode, you know, maybe have them resolve it so that way she doesn't feel that guilt anymore, because now she's not seeing her brother anymore, and I feel like it's kind of mismatched. Like that would have, and we still could have had the whole, they get stuck in the diner because the walk-in storm, and it should have been 5 minutes. It should have been they get stuck in the diner, the ball pit scene happens, and then it's the next morning and she's gone. That should have been it, not the whole episode. I think that I just kind of got bored when I wasn't seeing, the parts about Quiet and Loud and their fucked up situation. The whole part where, what was that guy who catches them in the back? Takes,
Oh, the manager,
yeah,
yeah.
he takes him outside and he just cuts off his ear. Holy shit, dude, that was really hard to watch. And then Quiet, came out and slit all their throats. That was pretty epic, I'm not gonna lie.
Well, and I think with that scene also, like the way the manager talks of, take him away, fellas, but first let me get a trophy real quick. Like, dude, like that's a chilling line. Because again, you're talking about them seeing these human beings as objects and not as people, and it's fully intended to be uncomfortable. It's fully intended to be very tough to watch, and I appreciate that. From a direction and a production standpoint, I appreciate that. I appreciate them trying to have serious moments like that. That's one thing I will give the show. The show has a great amount of serious moments, and considering how much humor there is, I think that this show has done a really good job of balancing. Has done a really, really good job of balancing all of that, I think. And the emotional moments, again, the emotional moments work for the most part. And again, I have to give the show that. I just come back to with this episode, and I know this is going to be a shorter episode than what a lot of you are out there are used to from us. It's just that there's not really a lot to talk about from this episode. In fact, I don't think we've missed anything. Matt, do you feel like we've missed anything? I feel like we've gone over everything.
Just probably how the ending was. That's probably the only thing I can think of, and
Yeah.
what it says.
We end up, obviously next episode, they're going to be in Chicago. And that's,
Yeah.
that's a big, it's a big thing. And obviously, I'm going to be honest, I didn't know until today, fellas, that there's 10 episodes. I thought there were only 9. So I
Yeah.
thought we were getting close to the end, and we still have, 4 episodes left?
Yes, sir.
We're a little over halfway through the season. Shoot, we're going to maybe have this series done and reviewed by Christmas, but
Boom.
I hope that's a good bet out there. What kind of odds do we put on? Does the Game of the Year episode come out before the last episode of Twisted Metal does? I think there's probably negative odds on that. So you're probably not making a lot of money if you bet on the Game of the Year episode coming out first. But I guess that my whole take on this episode is I wish that there were things that had been weaved into last episode a little bit more. I wish we'd seen Quiet's backstory a little bit more there. Like when she's still seeing those visions of Loud, I wish that that's how we saw the backstory, was like with him like reminding her of, hey, remember that one time we went through this? Remember this? Remember how we got away? Remember how you talked me into it? Like, I wish we had seen that because I feel like that would have hit a little bit harder. It already hits, but I feel like it could have hit even harder, so to say. Um, and again, like the whole like them having sex, I think that could have been weaved into another episode, a bigger episode, and we could have seen more of the main story develop. I said this as well. I wouldn't have minded if this whole episode was just about Sweet Tooth and him kind of creating his little cult. I wouldn't have minded that because I think that that does ultimately make some kind of advancement towards the main plot. So I just have a weird belief that in a show that only has 10 episodes in a season, I don't think you need more than one filler episode. And I think if you need another filler episode, I feel like that's a misstep with the writing and a misstep with the planning, above everything else. So it's an okay episode. It's not their best. I don't think they've wasted all of their momentum. I think there are plenty of things that work. I do hope that episode 7 picks things back up. And based on what you've told me, Kyle, I think it will. So I'm not really all that worried about it. So unless we've got anything else to add, fellas, that I think is a good place to wrap up. So that is going to do it for this episode of Side Mission. Be sure to check us out on Twitter at Side Mission Pod. You can follow us on Facebook as well at Side Mission Podcast. For the boys, for Matt, for Kyle, I'm Rusty. Thanks for listening.